Hello, Sagittarius, and welcome to today's reading. If Sagittarius is your sun sign, moon sign, or rising sign, then there may be something in this message that's meant to resonate with you. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy these kinds of reflective and healing readings. Now, this is a general reading for the collective, so take what speaks to you and gently leave behind anything that doesn't. As we spend this time together exploring these cards, I want to encourage you to listen to your own intuitions as much as you listen to my words. Because sometimes the message that reaches you the deepest isn't something the reader says. It's something you feel inside yourself when a particular card, a particular image, or a particular thought suddenly stands out. And here's the thing, no one understands your journey better than you do, so allow yourself to stay open, stay curious, and trust whatever feels meaningful to you along the way. Okay. Let's see what energy wants to come through for Sagittarius today. Sagittarius, the very first thing I notice when I look at this spread is the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from nothing happening, but the kind of silence that appears when someone is slowly beginning to see something they weren't ready to see before. Wow, what's interesting here? The Hermit card comes through right at the beginning, and there's something about this card that always makes me feel like someone has just emerged from a very long journey within themselves. For many of you, recent months may have brought a lot of questions. Questions about the path you're on. Questions about the people who entered your life and then disappeared. Questions about why certain doors never opened, even when you truly hoped they would. And what I get from the Hermit card isn't loss. It feels more like maturity, like a season of growth. A season where Sagittarius is no longer searching for every answer outside of themselves. You're listening to yourself more. You're paying attention to your own inner voice, and you're beginning to realize that some truths can only be understood after you've traveled far enough away from the person you used to be. The energy I'm picking up is that a lot of things are starting to make more sense, not because your circumstances suddenly changed overnight, but because your perspective is changing. There are things that once left you confused, things that made you wonder why life unfolded the way it did. But now, looking back, you may be able to see pieces of the puzzle that weren't visible before. And sometimes that's exactly how clarity arrives. Not like lightning striking the sky, but more like light slowly filling a dark room. What I keep coming back to is the feeling that you've grown far more than you realize. I feel like many Sagittarius individuals have gone through experiences that forced them to change, forced them to let go, forced them to understand that not everything we want is necessarily meant to travel with us forever. And even though those lessons may not have been easy, they seem to have shaped you into a stronger version of yourself, a calmer version, a deeper version. There's something in this energy that suggests you're no longer reacting to life the way you once did. You're observing more, reflecting more, being more intentional about where your energy goes. Okay, then we have the King of Wands card, and this is where the energy begins to shift. If the Hermit card is the figure sitting alone with a lantern in hand, the King of Wands card is the person who finally knows where they're going. There's something about this card. It carries a confidence that comes from experience, not confidence built on proving something to other people, but confidence that comes from truly knowing yourself. For many of you, a new direction may be starting to reveal itself, a new idea, a new goal, or simply a very clear feeling that you can no longer continue living inside old limitations. The King of Wands card isn't rushed, but it knows exactly what it wants. And that's what makes me feel like Sagittarius is stepping into a season where intuition and confidence are finally beginning to work together. You no longer need constant validation from the outside world. You no longer need everyone to understand you immediately. Because somewhere deep inside, you've started trusting your own journey. And the interesting thing is that whenever the Hermit card stands beside the King of Wands card, I often see the image of someone who has just completed an important chapter of their life. They're not the same person who began the journey. They've changed. They've learned something. They've seen something. And now they're standing before a new horizon with completely different eyes. The energy suggests an important truth is slowly coming into view. It could be connected to a decision, a path, a connection, or simply the truth about who you are becoming. And as that truth begins to surface, many things that once felt confusing may start to make a little more sense. Not because every question suddenly has an answer, but because you're finally seeing everything from a different place, a wiser place, a more peaceful place, and a place that feels much more ready to move forward. There's a very quiet energy coming through here. Not the kind of quiet that happens because everything is over. It's the kind of quiet that appears when someone has spent a very long time alone with thoughts they've never spoken out loud. And wow, the Hermit card appears again, and that immediately tells me this isn't a passing feeling. This doesn't feel like a decision made in a single moment. It feels more like the result of many days, many weeks, and for some people, maybe even many months of reflection. What's interesting here, I don't get the sense of someone trying to forget. Actually, it feels like the opposite. It feels like someone who spent a very long time trying to move on, only to realize that the feeling never truly left. For many of you, there may be someone who has repeatedly told themselves that they should keep going, that they should focus on other things, that they should leave the past where it belongs. But every time they think they've gone far enough, somehow your image finds its way back into their mind. Maybe it's a song, a familiar place, a random conversation that reminds them of something the two of you once shared. Or maybe it's just an ordinary moment in the middle of an ordinary day. And suddenly, they're thinking about you again. The energy I'm picking up feels like longing, but not in an impulsive way. It's deeper than that, more mature than that. It's the kind of feeling that appears when someone starts looking back on their life with complete honesty. They're no longer focused only on what happened. They're starting to think about what it meant. And that's when a realization begins to form. Some people enter our lives and eventually leave. But there are also people who leave such a deep imprint that forgetting them isn't nearly as simple as we once imagined. Okay. Then we have the High Priestess card. And there's always something incredibly unique about this energy. Because the High Priestess card doesn't chase answers. She doesn't force outcomes. She doesn't try to control where things are going. She simply knows. And there's something about this card that makes me feel like this person's going through a very deep emotional awakening. Not loud, not dramatic, just real, very real. There's something about the way they're beginning to understand the value of things that once felt natural. You know, sometimes we don't fully recognize someone's importance until distance enters the picture. When the conversations aren't there anymore, when the familiar presence we've grown used to suddenly becomes an empty space. And honestly, that feels like what's happening here. The distance doesn't seem to be making the feelings disappear. If anything, it seems to be making them clearer. The interesting thing about the High Priestess card is that it often speaks of emotions that remain unspoken, thoughts kept private, realizations that emerge in silence. This person may not be sharing everything they're going through with the people around them. They may still show up in the world as if everything is perfectly fine, but internally, a lot is changing. What I keep coming back to is the feeling that they're beginning to see you differently. Not just as someone who existed during a certain chapter of their life, not just a memory, not just an old story, but as someone who helped reshape the way they understand love, connection, and even themselves. And that's why this energy feels so awakening. Because sometimes the things that awaken us aren't major events. Sometimes it's simply the moment we finally become honest with our own heart. And I feel like someone is slowly approaching that moment. The energy suggests there is so much happening beneath the surface, far more than other people can see, far more than words are capable of expressing. It's almost as if an inner door is gradually opening. And the deeper I go into this energy, the more I feel that the silence was never truly indifference. It feels more like an inner journey. A journey where someone is beginning to understand the deeper meaning of this connection. And with each passing day, that understanding seems to become a little clearer than it was before. There's something incredibly powerful about the energy of the World card. Not the kind of power that's loud. Not the kind that arrives with a dramatic turning point. It's more like standing at the top of a hill, looking back at the road you've traveled, and realizing you're no longer the same person who started the journey. The energy I'm picking up feels like an ending, but not an ending rooted in loss. This feels like the kind of ending that arrives when a lesson has finally fulfilled its purpose, when a chapter of life has given you everything it came here to give. And now, whether you fully recognize it yet or not, that chapter seems to be slowly closing. For many of you, there may have been something in your life that kept you feeling stuck for a very long time. A way of thinking, a fear, a relationship, an expectation, or maybe even an older version of yourself. And the interesting thing about the World card is that it doesn't appear to force you into letting go. It tends to show up when you're finally ready. Because there's a huge difference between being forced to release something and reaching the moment where you genuinely understand it's time to move forward. What's interesting here, I feel like Sagittarius is moving closer to that second experience. The question may no longer be, why did this happen to me? Instead, it may be becoming, what was this trying to teach me? And sometimes a single shift in perspective can change an entire journey. There may have been experiences in the past that felt disappointing. Experiences that made you wonder if you were heading in the wrong direction. But the deeper I look into this energy, the more those experiences feel like teachers rather than obstacles. They brought you here, to the version of yourself that exists today. The version that understands themselves more deeply. The version that knows what truly matters. Okay, then we have the Two of Pentacles card. And this card always makes me think of someone trying to keep multiple parts of their life in balance all at once. Responsibilities, emotions, plans, expectations, the things they want and the things they feel they should want. There's something about this card that makes me feel like you've been carrying a lot for a very long time. Not because you're weak. Actually, quite the opposite. You've been strong enough to keep going, strong enough to adapt, strong enough to keep finding your footing no matter what life placed in front of you. But sometimes constantly adapting can make us forget to ask an important question. Do I still want to carry all of this? The energy suggests a rebalancing process may already be happening. And it doesn't seem to be coming from outside pressure. It feels like it's coming from within. Almost as if part of you is beginning to understand that not every door needs to stay open forever. Not every journey needs to continue indefinitely. Not every responsibility is meant to travel with you for the rest of your life. For many of you, this could be a season where old limitations begin to loosen their grip. Old beliefs that once made you doubt yourself may be losing their power. Things that once held you back may not feel nearly as intimidating as they once did. And honestly, what I love most about seeing the World card beside the Two of Pentacles card is the feeling of expansion. Not expansion because you're pushing harder. Not expansion because you're moving faster. But expansion because you're no longer carrying things that don't truly belong to you. What I keep coming back to is the image of a long road stretching out ahead, not a completely new road. In many ways, it feels like the same road that was always there. You just couldn't see it clearly before. There was too much in the way, too much noise, too much pressure, too many unanswered questions. But now, it feels like the sky is beginning to clear. And the deeper I move into this energy, the more it feels like Sagittarius is standing at the edge of something much bigger than before. Not because the outside world suddenly changed, but because something inside you is changing. And sometimes, that's the most powerful shift of all. There's a huge difference between someone who's still uncertain and someone who has finally seen what they truly want. And honestly, that's the feeling I get the moment the King of Wands card appears here. This energy no longer feels hesitant. It no longer feels like someone standing at a crossroads, trying to calculate every possible outcome. Something is becoming clear, very focused, very intentional. What's interesting here? The King of Wands card often shows up when a person begins acting from inner confidence rather than fear. And I feel like that's exactly what's changing. For many of you, there may have been someone who spent a long time observing, thinking, analyzing, questioning themselves, trying to figure out what was truly right for them. But at a certain point, continuing to think doesn't create new answers anymore. It only extends the waiting. And this energy feels like the moment someone finally realizes they need to move toward what their heart has been pointing toward all along. The energy I'm picking up feels like determination. Not determination to win, not determination to prove something, but determination to be honest with themselves. You know, some decisions are made through logic, but other decisions emerge after a long season of growth, after a person has spent enough time learning what truly matters, what deserves to stay, and what has reached the point where it needs to be released. Okay, then we have the Seven of Swords card. And this is where things become really interesting. Because a lot of people see this card and immediately think about deception. But that's not what stands out to me here. Not at all. There's something about removing the outside influence. Removing the things that have made everything far more complicated than it needed to be. Sometimes people can't move forward because they're carrying too many opinions that don't belong to them, too much pressure from the world around them, too much fear about what everyone else might think. And I feel like someone within this energy is beginning to step away from that, not in a rebellious way, not in a dramatic way, but in a mature way, a quieter way. They're beginning to understand that not everyone needs an explanation, not every decision requires universal approval, and not everyone around them is capable of understanding the inner journey they've actually been through. The energy suggests some obstacles may be losing their grip. Old beliefs, old circumstances, old fears that kept someone hesitating for far longer than they wanted to. And what stands out most to me is the movement from passivity into action, from waiting into choosing, from uncertainty into clarity. What I keep coming back to is the image of someone clearing the road in front of them, not by forcing life to change, but by recognizing what still belongs in their life and what doesn't. And the more I sit with the combination of the King of Wands card and the Seven of Swords card, the more it feels like the energy of someone who has stopped searching for answers outside of themselves. They're starting to trust their intuition, trust their experience, trust what their heart has been trying to tell them for a very long time. For many of you, this could relate to an important choice, a direction, a goal, or perhaps a connection that once felt buried beneath layers of confusion and distraction. But now, those layers seem to be slowly lifting, not overnight, not dramatically, just little by little. Enough for someone to see the road ahead more clearly than they did yesterday. And sometimes, that's all it takes to completely change the direction of a journey. There are certain cards that completely shift the energy of a reading the moment they appear. Not because they're dramatic, not because they demand attention, but because they bring everything back to what truly matters. And that's exactly the feeling I get when the Ten of Pentacles card, the Lovers card, and the Two of Cups card appear together. The energy I'm picking up feels serious, not in a heavy way, but in a meaningful way. This doesn't feel like emotions that come and go. It doesn't feel like temporary attraction. And it doesn't feel like a connection that's only meant to exist for a brief season. There's a maturity to this energy, a sense that something is being viewed through a much deeper lens now. For many of you, it feels like there may have been a long period where important feelings were placed on the back burner. Maybe because of circumstances, maybe because of responsibilities, maybe because life demanded attention elsewhere. But the deeper I go into these cards, the more it feels like the heart is slowly finding its way back to where it belongs. What's interesting here, the Ten of Pentacles card isn't just about love, it's about longevity. It's about foundations. It's about stability. It's about looking beyond the present moment. Whenever this card appears, I often feel an energy beginning to ask a different kind of question. Not, what do I want right now? But what will truly matter to me in the long run? And that's a very different conversation. It feels like someone is shifting away from thinking only about immediate emotions and beginning to think about the future, about what can actually be built, about what deserves time, energy, commitment, and heart. Then we have the Lovers card. And one of the things I've always loved about this card is that it isn't simply about romance. At its core, it's about choice. A choice that happens when the heart and the soul are finally moving in the same direction. There's something about seeing a person or seeing a connection with more clarity than before, without fear clouding the view, without outside voices carrying so much weight, until eventually only one question remains. What truly matters to me? And sometimes the answer doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't strike like lightning. It arrives quietly, like a sense of peace that's been growing in the background for a very long time. A feeling that no matter how much life changes, there are certain things the heart never really forgets. What I keep coming back to is sincerity. Because the more I sit with the Lovers card in this reading, the less it feels like idealization. This doesn't feel like fantasy. It doesn't feel like wishful thinking. It feels like awareness. As if someone is finally becoming honest about what they truly feel. And then, the Two of Cups card appears. Wow, what a beautiful energy. This card always makes me think of resonance, not because two people are exactly the same, but because they understand each other in a way that isn't always easy to explain. The energy suggests a connection may be viewed with greater appreciation now. A bond may be seen through more mature eyes. And for many of you, something that once felt delayed or set aside could be revisited from an entirely different perspective. Not because old circumstances are repeating themselves, but because the people involved may no longer be the same people they once were. There's more wisdom here, more self-awareness, a deeper understanding of what actually holds value. And honestly, there's something incredibly beautiful about the combination of the Ten of Pentacles card, the Lovers card, and the Two of Cups card. Because this isn't the energy of chasing, it's the energy of recognizing what's worth keeping, what's worth protecting, what's worth giving your heart to. And the longer I sit with this reading, the more I feel a very deep shift taking place beneath the surface. Almost as if after everything that's been learned, after everything that's been experienced, the heart is finally turning its attention toward what matters most. Not with urgency, not with pressure, but with a clarity that seems to grow stronger with time. There are moments in life when change happens very quietly. It begins behind closed doors, inside conversations that not everyone gets to hear, inside thoughts that a person keeps entirely to themselves. But eventually, the movement beneath the surface starts creating ripples. And that's exactly the feeling I get when the Seven of Swords card, the Knight of Swords card, and the Five of Swords card appear together. The energy I'm picking up feels like something can no longer remain hidden the way it once did, not because someone is intentionally exposing it, but because truth has a way of finding its own path into the light. What's interesting here? The Seven of Swords card in this reading doesn't make me think of deception. It makes me think of privacy. Things that were kept close to the chest, plans that weren't ready to be shared, feelings that never quite found words, decisions being weighed quietly behind the scenes. It feels like someone has spent a significant amount of time holding everything inside, not because they wanted distance, but because they needed time to understand themselves first, time to become certain of their direction, time to know that what they were feeling was real. And now, it seems like that energy is moving into a different phase, a phase where keeping everything in the dark may no longer feel necessary. Okay, then we have the Knight of Swords card, and immediately the pace of the reading begins to shift. If the earlier cards carried the energy of reflection and observation, the Knight of Swords card feels like the moment someone finally stops running circles inside their own mind. They want clarity, they want truth, they want movement. They want to move forward instead of remaining in the same place. There's something about the energy of a decision that has been forming internally for a very long time, and now it's beginning to create momentum. For many of you, this could relate to conversations, words that were never spoken, things that were postponed, or simply the fact that people are starting to notice that something is changing. Not everyone understands the entire story, but they can feel that something is different, something is shifting, and sometimes even a small change in energy is enough for the people around us to notice. What I keep coming back to is the feeling of surprise, not because this change appeared out of nowhere, but because many people became accustomed to the old version of the story. They became familiar with the way things used to work, familiar with what they assumed would always stay the same. And when the direction begins to change, they may not immediately know how to interpret it. And that's where the Five of Swords card comes in. A card that often reflects differing viewpoints, different opinions, different reactions. Because not everyone sees the same situation through the same lens. And not everyone understands what's been happening behind the scenes. The energy suggests there may be conversations, comments, speculation, questions, different interpretations of what's unfolding. But here's the interesting thing. This reading doesn't seem focused on the people watching from the outside. It's focused on the transformation itself. Because whenever someone begins living more honestly with themselves, there are usually people who feel surprised, people who don't understand right away, people who wonder why things are moving in a different direction. And honestly, that's a very natural part of growth. The deeper I go into this energy, the less it feels like a story about convincing other people. And the more it feels like a story about clarity. Something that was once hidden is gradually becoming visible, layer by layer, step by step, until what has already changed on the inside begins to reveal itself in the outer world. And that's often the moment when people start realizing that the journey they're looking at is no longer the same journey it used to be. There are moments in life when someone no longer walks away because they're angry. They no longer walk away because they're disappointed. And they certainly don't walk away to prove something to anyone. They leave because they've finally understood. And that's the energy I feel the moment the Ten of Wands card appears here. The energy I'm picking up feels like exhaustion, but not the kind of exhaustion that comes after a long day. This feels deeper than that. It feels like the kind of weariness that accumulates across many chapters of a life, like someone who's been carrying far too much for far too long, responsibilities that were never truly theirs, expectations placed on them by others, stories that ended long ago but somehow were never released, grief that was never fully named, and eventually, a question begins to surface. How much longer do I want to carry all of this? You know what's interesting? The Ten of Wands card always makes me think of someone standing near the final gate of a very long journey. They've almost made it through. They've learned what they needed to learn. They've carried more than most people ever realized. And because of that, putting a burden down is no longer a sign of failure. It's a sign of growth. It's a sign of wisdom. For many of you, I feel like someone is beginning to realize that loyalty and sacrifice don't always mean staying. Sometimes loving yourself means recognizing when it's time to step away from something that no longer brings peace. Okay, Then we have the Eight of Cups card. And honestly, this is one of the deepest cards in the tarot when it comes to moving forward. Because the Eight of Cups card doesn't leave because it doesn't care. If anything, it often leaves because it cared too much. There's something about that moment when a person looks at something they once poured their heart into and realizes it no longer reflects who they're becoming. That doesn't make the memories less meaningful. It doesn't erase the value of what was experienced. It simply means the soul is searching for something more authentic, something more aligned with the person they've grown into. The energy suggests this doesn't feel impulsive. It doesn't feel like a decision made overnight. It feels like the result of countless moments of reflection, countless attempts, countless times telling themselves that everything was fine, until eventually they could no longer ignore the voice inside. And what I feel here isn't loss, not really. It feels more like liberation, almost as if someone is finally giving themselves permission to be honest about what they truly feel. And then the Four of Cups card appears, and wow, there's such a quiet awakening in this energy. Because the Four of Cups card often shows up when someone begins seeing life through a different lens. The things that once held their attention don't create the same feeling anymore. What once felt satisfying no longer feels like enough, not because they've become difficult to please, not because they're asking for too much, but because they've changed. What I keep coming back to is the feeling that a chapter is slowly coming to a close, not through resentment, but through understanding. There's a calmness here, a kind of peace that emerges when people stop trying to force things into being something they were never meant to be. And the more I sit with the combination of the Ten of Wands card, the Eight of Cups card, and the Four of Cups card, the more I see the image of someone gently removing one layer of weight after another from their shoulders. Not because they're giving up on life, but because they're choosing life, a lighter life, a more honest life, a freer life. For many of you, this may be a season where an older version of yourself is being left behind. Not forgotten, but honored. Because every experience has already served its purpose. Every lesson has left its mark. And now, rather than continuing to carry what has already completed its journey, a new energy seems to be inviting someone forward with much lighter hands. Light enough to finally receive something that feels more genuine, more aligned, and more true to who they are becoming. There's a very different feeling that comes through when these final cards appear. It doesn't feel like the end of a journey. If anything, it feels more like standing in front of a wide open doorway and realizing that the air on the other side has changed. Something feels lighter, brighter, and somehow more hopeful. The energy I'm picking up begins with the Wheel of Fortune card. And this card always makes me think about those moments when life starts moving in a new direction. Not because someone forced change to happen, but because a cycle has completed itself, a lesson has been learned. An older version of a person has fulfilled its purpose, and now the wheel begins turning towards something different. What's interesting here is that so much of this energy doesn't feel random. And I don't mean that in a fated or predetermined way. What I mean is that there are moments in life when everything we've learned starts creating a new path forward, almost like the final pieces of a puzzle slowly finding where they belong. For many of you, there may have been distance, differences, paths that once seemed to be moving in completely opposite directions. But the deeper I sit with this energy, the more I feel a meeting point beginning to emerge. Not because someone lost themselves along the way, but because growth happened. Because both people may have become wiser than they were before. Okay, then we have the Two of Cups card. And honestly, I've always felt this is one of the most beautiful cards when it comes to connection. Not a connection built on need, but a connection built on resonance. There's something about two energies beginning to see each other more clearly, not through expectations, not through fear, but through authenticity. And that creates a very different feeling, a peaceful feeling, a feeling that things no longer need to be forced. The energy suggests an opportunity for harmony may be opening, an opportunity to understand one another more deeply, an opportunity to see what may once have been hidden beneath circumstances, timing, or personal lessons. And then the Strength card appears. And I love seeing this card so close to the end of the reading, because the Strength card isn't about overpowering someone else. It's about overcoming the fears within yourself. It's the courage to remain gentle, the courage to remain honest, the courage to keep your heart open after everything you've been through. What I keep coming back to is the image of someone who no longer feels the need to hold everything together through sheer force. They no longer need to prove they're strong, because their peace speaks for them now. And it feels like that very maturity is creating space for something more beautiful to enter their life. Not through pressure, not through urgency, but through trust. Trust in the journey, trust in themselves. Trust that what truly belongs will never need to be forced. And finally, the Ten of Cups card appears. Wow, what a beautiful card to close this energy with. Because the Ten of Cups card carries the feeling of emotional fulfillment. Not a perfect life, not a life without challenges, but the feeling of looking back and realizing just how far you've come. For many of you, this feels like hope, but a different kind of hope, a mature hope, a hope that isn't built on illusion or unrealistic expectations. It's built on what has been learned, what has been healed, what has finally been understood. And the more I look at the combination of the Wheel of Fortune card, the Two of Cups card, the Strength card, and the Ten of Cups card, the more it feels like Sagittarius is stepping into a new chapter with a more open heart than before. Not because every question has been answered, not because every road ahead is perfectly clear, but because you've become strong enough to keep moving forward even without seeing the entire picture. And honestly, that may be one of the most beautiful forms of hope there is. The moment we stop moving forward because we're afraid of what's behind us and start moving forward because we finally trust what might be waiting ahead.